Hey guys, I know it's been a while. It's a new quarter and I'm in a new class, and so we've got a new book. It's actually the continuation of Gardner's Art Through History. It's just volume 2. So today I'm going to be reading chapter 26. Um, it's about 20 pages. I did put on some like forest kind of music. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. Um, But yeah, that's what we're doing today. I hope this helps somebody. And I'm sorry for those of you who might have been really waiting for me to do the other chapters. I have ADHD. It may not happen. I don't know. If there's a voting thing, like a lot of people request a certain chapter, I will make the time to do it. It might be in, different parts, so like the audio might be a little mixed up because I might do different sections at different times. But if you guys want that, you can comment what chapter you think would be really, really helpful from either of these, actually, Volume 1 or Volume 2. And then if there's one that gets a lot of likes, maybe like even 10 likes would be pretty amazing. On that one comment, then I will do that because I would love to help people if I can. That would be really cool. Okay, so let's get into it. This is Rococo to Neoclassicism, the 18th century in Europe and America. If my voice gets kind of quiet, I will adjust the volume in the editing process. The reason that happens, though, is because my voice gets tired and it's a lot easier to speak in hushed tones and higher pitches. It just takes less energy. So yeah, let's get started. Framing the Era, the Enlightenment, Angelica Kaufman, and Neoclassicism. The dawn of the Enlightenment in the 18th century brought a new way of thinking critically about the world and about men and women, independently of religion, myth, or tradition. Enlightenment thinkers rejected unfounded beliefs in favor of empirical evidence and promoted the questioning of all assertions. This new worldview was a major factor in the revolutionary political, social, and economic changes that swept Europe and America in the mid to late 1700s. Among these were the wars for independence in America and France, the Industrial Revolution in England, and a renewed admiration in both Europe and America for the art and architecture of classical antiquity. The Enlightenment's emphasis on rationality in parts explains this classical focus, because the geometric harmony of classical art and architecture embodied Enlightenment ideals. Moreover, Greece and Rome represented the pinnacle of civilized society, paragons of enlightened political organization. With their traditions of liberty, civic virtue, morality, and sacrifice, these cultures were ideal models during a period of political upheaval. The Enlightenment interest in classical antiquity, in turn, gave rise to the artistic movement known as Neoclassicism, which incorporated the subjects and styles of Greek and Roman art. One of the pioneers of neoclassical painting was Angelica Kaufman, 1741 to 1807. Born in Switzerland and trained in Italy, Kaufman spent many of her productive years in England. In an era when nearly all successful artists were men, Kaufman enjoyed an enviable reputation and was a founding member of the British Royal Academy of Arts. Cornelia presenting her children as her treasures, or Mother of the Gracchi, is perhaps Kaufman's best-known work. The theme of the painting is the virtue of Cornelia, mother of the future political leaders Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong, please forgive me. Who, in the 2nd century BCE, that's a truck outside, I apologize for that too, attempted to reform the Roman Republic. Cornelia reveals her character in the scene, which takes place after a visitor has shown off her fine jewelry, and then insists that Cornelia show hers. Instead of taking out her own precious adornments, Cornelia brings her sons forward, presenting them as her jewels. Mother of the Gracchi is a characteristic example of the Enlightenment embrace of the values of the classical world. An exemplum virtutis, example of virtue, drawn from Greek and Roman history and literature. To give her retelling of the story an authentic air, Kaufman studied ancient statuary and then clothed her actors in ancient Roman garb and posed them in statuesque attitudes within a Roman interior. I'm just trying to make sure I didn't skip a line here. That's probably fine. Alright. The architectural setting is severe, and the composition and drawing have the simplicity and firmness of low relief carving, qualities that became hallmarks of the Neoclassical style. A century of revolutions. In 1700, Louis XIV still ruled France as the Sun King, presiding over his realm and French culture from his palatial residence at Versailles. See the Sun King's Palace at Versailles, page 759. The French King's Palace inspired the construction of many other grandiose homes in the continent and across the English Channel during the early 18th century, including Blenheim Palace, which Sir John Vanbrugh and Nicholas Hawksmoor designed for the Duke of Marlborough. By 1800, however, revolutions had overthrown the monarchy in France and achieved independence for the British colonies in America. The 18th century also gave birth to a revolution of a different kind, the Industrial Revolution, which began in England and soon transformed the economies of continental Europe and North America and eventually the world. Against this backdrop of revolutionary change, social as well as political, economic, and technological, came major transformations in the arts. Compare, for example, Antoine Watteau's 1717 Pilgrimage to Cytherea, which unfolds in a lush landscape and celebrates the romantic dalliances of the moneyed elite, with Angelica Kaufman's 1785 Mother of the Gracchi, set in a austere home of classical columns and piers and glorifying the maternal virtue of an ancient Roman woman. The two works have little in common other than that both are horizontally oriented oil paintings on canvas. In the 18th century, shifts in style and subject matter were both rapid and significant. Rococo. The death of Louis XIV in 1715 brought many changes in French high society. The elite quickly abandoned the court of Versailles for the pleasures of town life. Although French citizens still owed allegiance to a monarch, the early 18th century brought a resurgence of aristocratic social, political, and economic power. Members of the nobility not only exercised their traditional privileges, for example, exemption from certain taxes and from forced labor on public works, but also sought to expand their power. In the cultural realm, aristocrats re-established their predominance as art patrons. The hotels, elegant private townhouses of Paris, soon became the centers of a new, softer style called Rococo. Associated with the Regency following the death of Louis XIV, and with the reign of Louis XV, the Rococo style in art and architecture was the perfect expression of the light-hearted elegance that the wealthy cultivated in their opulent homes. Architecture. Rococo appeared in France around 1700, primarily as a style of interior design. The French Rococo exterior was most often simple or even plain, but the Rococo exuberance took over the interior. The term derived from the French word rocaille, or pebble, but it was referred especially to the small stones and shells used to decorate grotto interiors. Shells or forms resembling shells were the principal motifs in Rococo ornamentation. Salon de la Princesse. A typical French Rococo room is the Salon de Princesse in the Hôtel de Soubise in Paris, designed by Germaine Beaufrand in collaboration with the painter Charles-Joseph Natoire and the sculptor Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne. Parisian salons, such as this one, were the center of Rococo social life. They usurped the role that Louis XIV's Versailles Palace played in the 17th century, when the Sun King set the tone for French culture. In the early 18th century, the centralized and grandiose palace-based culture of Baroque France gave way to a much more intimate and decentralized culture based in private homes. The new architectural style mirrored this social and cultural shift. A comparison between the Salon de la Princesse and the Galerie des Glaces at Versailles reveals how Beaufrand softened the strong architectural lines and panels of the earlier style into flexible, sinuous curves. The walls melt into the vault, irregular painted shapes, topped by sculpture and separated by rocaille shells, replace the hall's cornices. Painting, architecture, and sculpture combine to form a single ensemble. The profusion of curving tendrils and sprays of foliage blend with the shell forms to give an effect of freely growing nature, suggesting that the designer permanently bedecked the Rococo room for a festival. French Rococo interiors were lively totals of works, exquisitely wrought furniture, enchanting small sculptures, ornamented mirror frames, crystal chandeliers, delightful ceramics and silver plates and goblets, small paintings, and decorative tapestries complemented the architecture, relief sculptures, and mural paintings. Unfortunately, the Salon de la Princesse has lost most of the movable furnishings that once contributed so much to its total ambiance. Visitors can nonetheless imagine how this and similar Rococo rooms, with their alternating gilding moldings, vivacious relief sculptures, and daintily colored ornamentation. Wait, what? Sorry, this page thing doesn't. Okay, there we are. And daintily colored ornamentation of the flowers and garlands, all visually multiplied by their mirror reflections, must have harmonized with the chamber music played in them, with the elaborate costumes of satin and brocade, and with the equally elegant etiquette and sparkling wit of the people who graced them. Okay. Is it? Yeah, okay. Amalian Bird. Okay. The French Rococo style quickly spread beyond Paris. The Amalian Bird, a small lodge that the French architect Francois Boucher built in the park of the Nymphenburg Palace in Munich, is a prime example of Germany's adoption of the Parisian style. The most spectacular room in the lodge is the circular hall of mirrors, a silver and blue ensemble of architecture, stucco relief, silvered bronze mirrors, and crystal. The hall dazzles the eyes and showcases the full ornamental repertoire of the Rococo style at the height of its popularity. Silvery light, reflected and amplified by windows and mirrors, bathes the room and creates shapes and contours that weave rhythmically around the upper walls and the ceiling coves. Everything seems organic, growing, and in motion, an ultimate refinement of illusion, with virtuoso flourishes created by the team of architects, artists, and artisans. Ooh, this is a hard word. Versenheligen. I hope I don't have to say that again. Versenheligen. Although some early 18th century architects, such as Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach, continued to design churches incorporating Baroque and classical elements. For example, Karl Schirch, in Vienna. Others, especially in Germany, eagerly adopted the Parisian Rococo style of domestic architecture for a classical architecture. One of the most splendid examples is the pilgrimage church of Versenheligen, 14 saints, figure 26 so far, near Bad Staffelstein, which the German architect Balthasar Neumann began as construction was about to be concluded on the Grandois Palace. he had designed in 1719 for the Prince Bishops of Wurzburg. Wir sind Helligines, undulating facade, and curve-filled plan and interior reveal the influence of great Italian Baroque architect Francesco Borromini. Newman's plan, however, is even more complex than the plans of Borromini's churches in Rome. The German architect deliberately banished all straight lines. The composition, made up of tangent ovals and circles, achieves a quite different interior effect within the essential outlines of a traditional rectilinear basilican church, with a nave, transept, and apse. Undulating space is in the continuous motion, creating unlimited vistas that are bewildering in their variety and surprise effects, as is also true of the contemporaneous Louise Kirche by Dominicus Zimmermann. Numerous large windows in Wir sind Heiligens, richly decorated walls, flood the interior with an even, bright, and cheerful light. The church's walls and vaults pulse, flow, and commingle as if they were ceaselessly in the process of being molded. The design's fluidity of line, the floating and hovering surfaces, the interwoven spaces, and the dematerialized masses combine to suggest a frozen counterpart to the intricacy of voices in a Baroque fugue by Johann Sebastian Bach. The Bad Staffelstein Pilgrimage Church is a brilliant ensemble of architecture, painting, sculpture, and music that dissolves the boundaries among the arts. Painting and sculpture. The unification of diverse artistic media that characterizes the Rococo style did not preclude the rise to prominence of painters of independent works. Chief among them were Antoine Watteau, Francois Boucher, and Jean-Honoré Fragonard in France. By the way, I did take French class. I'm sorry if I pronounced some of these wrong. It's just how I remember how they're supposed to be said. Antoine Watteau. The painter whom scholars most closely associate with French Rococo is Antoine Watteau. Watteau is largely responsible for creating a specific type of Rococo painting genre called a fête galante, or gallant outdoor party. Fête galante of paintings depicted the outdoor entertainment or amusements of French high society. The premier example is Watteau's masterpiece, painted in two versions, Pilgrimage to Siberia, the painting that was Watteau's entry for admission to the French Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture. In 1717, the Fête Galante was not an acceptable category for submission, but rather than reject Watteau's candidacy, the Academy created a new category to accommodate his entry. At the turn of the 18th century, two competing doctrines sharply divided the membership of the French Royal Academy. Many members followed Nicolas Poussin in teaching that form was the most important element in painting, whereas coloring and painting are as allurements for persuading the eyes. Colors, argued Poussin's admirers, were additions for effect and not really essential. The other group took Rubens as its model and proclaimed the natural supremacy of color and the coloristic style as the artist's proper guide. Depending on which doctrine they supported, members of the French Academy were classified either as Poussinists or Rubenists. Watteau was Flemish, and Rubens' coloristic style heavily influenced his work. With Watteau in their ranks, the Rubenists carried the day, establishing Rococo painting as the preferred style in early 18th century France. In Pilgrimage to Siberia, luxuriously costumed lovers make a pilgrimage to Siberia, the island of eternal youth and love, sacred to Aphrodite. Some art historians think that the lovers are returning from Siberia rather than having just arrived. Watteau provides few clues to settle the question definitively. The elegant figures move gracefully from the protective shade of a woodland park filled with playful cupids and voluptuous statuary. The poses of the figures, which blend elegance and sweetness, are the hallmark of Watteau's style, both in ambitious multi-figure compositions such as Pilgrimage to Siberia, and in single-figure studies such as L'Indifferent. Watteau prepared his paintings using albums of drawings in which he sought to capture slow movement from difficult and unusual angles, searching for the smoothest, most poised, and most refined attitudes. As he experimented with nuances of posture and movement, Watteau also strove for the most exquisite shades of color difference, defining in a single stroke the shimmer of silk at a bent knee, or the shine appearing on a glossy surface as it emerges from shadow. The haze of color, the subtly modeled shapes, the gliding motion, and the air of suave gentility tinged with nostalgia appealed greatly to Watteau's wealthy patrons, whom, even as he was dying from tuberculosis, he still depicted as carefree and at leisure in his most unusual painting, Signboard Abjurant. Francois Boucher, after Watteau's death, brought his brilliant career to a premature end at age 36. Francois Boucher rose to the dominant position in French painting, in large part because he was a Madame de Pompadour's favorite artist. Although Boucher was an excellent portraitist, his success rested primarily on his canvases depicting shepherds, nymphs, and goddesses gracefully cavorting in shady glens engulfed by pink and sky blue light. Cupid a Captive presents a rosy pyramid of infant and female flesh, set off against a cool, leafy background with fluttering draperies, both hiding and revealing the nudity of the figures. Boucher used the full range of Italian and French Baroque devices, the dynamic play of crisscrossing diagonals, curvilinear forms, and slanting recessions, to create his masterful composition. But he dissected powerful Baroque curves into a simplicity of decorative flourishes, dissipating Baroque drama into sensual playfulness. Lively and light-hearted, Boucher's artful Rococo fantasies became mirrors in which his well-to-do French patrons could behold the ornamental reflections of their cherished pastimes. Jean-Honoré Fragonard. Boucher's greatest student, Jean-Honoré Fragonard, was a first-rate colorist whose decorative skill almost surpassed his master's. An example of his manner can stand as characteristic not only of his work but also of the later Rococo in general. In The Swing, a young gentleman has convinced an unsuspecting older man, thought by some art historians to be a bishop, to swing the young man's pretty sweetheart higher and higher, while her lover, and the work's patron, in the lower left corner, stretches out to admire her from a strategic position on the ground. The young lady flirtatiously kicks off her shoe toward the little statue of Cupid. The infant love god holds his finger to his lips. The landscape emulates Watteau's, a luxuriant, perfumed bower in a park that very much resembles a stage scene from comic opera. The glowing pastel colors and soft light convey, almost by themselves, the theme's sensuality. Jean-Baptiste Rose. The Swing is less than 3 feet in height, and Watteau's L'Indifferent is barely 10 inches tall. Even the figure-packed landscape, Pilgrimage to Siberia, is only a little more than 4 feet high. Indeed, Rococo was a style best suited for small-scale works projecting a mood of sensual intimacy, and Rococo salons often featured tabletop sculptures, such as Nymph and Satyr Carousing by Claude Michael, called Clodion. But the intimate Rococo style could also be adapted for paintings of huge size, such as the work of Jean-Baptiste Rose demonstrates. A Venetian, Tiepolo worked for patrons in Austria-Germany, in Spain, as well as in Italy. He was a master of illusionistic ceiling decoration in the Baroque tradition, but favored the bright, cheerful colors and relaxed compositions of Rococo easel paintings. In Apotheosis of the Pisani family, a ceiling fresco in the Villa Pisani at Straw in northern Italy, Tiepolo depicted seemingly weightless figures fluttering through vast sunlit skies and fleecy clouds, their forms casting dark accents against the brilliant light of high noon. The painter elevated Pisani family members to the rank of gods in a heavenly scene recalling the ceiling paintings of Pozzo, but while retaining 17th century illusionism in his works, Tiepolo softened the rhetoric and created pictorial schemes of great elegance and grace, unsurpassed for their sheer effectiveness as decor. The Enlightenment. The aristocratic culture celebrated in Rococo art did not go unchallenged during the 18th century. Indeed, the feudal system that served as the foundation of social and economic life in Europe dissolved, and the rigid social hierarchies that provided the basis for Rococo art and patronage relaxed. By the end of the 18th century, revolutions had erupted in France and America. A major factor in these political, social, and economic changes was the intellectual movement known as the Enlightenment. Philosophy and science. Enlightenment thinkers rejected faith in favor of reason and championed an approach to the acquisition of knowledge based on empirical observation and scientific experimentation. Enlightenment-era science had roots in the work of René Descartes, Blaise Pascal, and Isaac Newton, and Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz in the 17th century. England and France were the principal centers of the Enlightenment, although its maxims influenced the thinking of intellectuals throughout Europe and in the American colonies. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and other American notables embraced its principles. Newton and Locke. Of particular importance for Enlightenment thought was the work of Isaac Newton and John Locke in England. In his scientific studies, Newton insisted on empirical proof of his theories and encouraged others to avoid metaphysics and the supernatural, realms that extended beyond the natural physical world. This emphasis on both tangible data and concrete experience became a cornerstone of Enlightenment thought. In addition, Newton's experiments revealed rationality in the physical world, and Enlightenment thinkers transferred that concept to the socio-political world by promoting a rationally organized society. Locke, whose works acquired the status of Enlightenment gospel, developed these ideas further. According to Locke's doctrine of empiricism, knowledge comes through sensory perception of the material world. From these perceptions alone, people form ideas. Locke asserted that human beings are born good, not cursed by original sin. The laws of nature grant them the natural rights of life, liberty, and property, as well as the right to freedom of conscience. Government is by contract, and the purpose of government is to protect these rights. If and when government abuses these rights, the citizenry has the further natural right of revolution. Locke's ideas empowered people to take control of their own destinies. Philosophies. This looks like a name, though. I think it's pronounced Philos? Philosophes? The work of Newton and Locke also inspired many French intellectuals, or philosophes. Okay. These thinkers conceived of individuals and societies as parts of physical nature. They shared the conviction that the ills of humanity could be remedied by applying reason and common sense to human problems. They criticized the powers of church and state as irrational limits placed on political and intellectual freedom. They were convinced that by accumulating and propagating knowledge, humanity could advance by degrees to a happier state than it had ever known. This conviction matured into the doctrine of progress, and its corollary doctrine, the perfectibility of humankind. Previous societies, for the most part, perceived the future as inevitable, the cycle of life and death. They believed that religious beliefs determined fate. The notion of progress, the systematic and planned improvement of society, first developed during the 18th century and still influences 21st century Western thought. Diderot. Diderot? I don't know. Animated by their belief in human progress and perfectibility, the philosophers took on the task of gathering knowledge and making it accessible to all who could read. Their program was, in effect, the democratization of knowledge. Denis Diderot greatly advanced the Enlightenment's rationalistic and materialistic thinking. He became editor of the pioneering Encyclopedia, a compilation of articles written by more than 100 contributors, including all the leading philosophers. Okay. The Encyclopedia was truly comprehensive. Its formal title was Systematic Dictionary of the Sciences, Arts, and Crafts, and included all available knowledge, historical, scientific, and technical, as well as religious and moral, and political theory. The Encyclopedia's 21st century descendant is Wikipedia, which has a similar goal of collecting all that is known and making that knowledge universally available. The first installment of Diderot's 35-volume illustrated encyclopedia appeared in 1751. There's a truck right outside my window, whatever. The first installment, 35-volume, appeared in 1751 and the last in 1780. Other Enlightenment authors produced different compilations of knowledge. Diderot's contemporary Georges Louis Leclerc undertook a kind of encyclopedia of the natural sciences. His Natural History, a monumental work of 44 volumes, was especially valuable for its zoological content. At the same time, Swedish botanist Carolus Linnaeus established a system of plant classification. The political, economic, and social consequences of this increase in knowledge and of the doctrine of progress were explosive. It is no coincidence that the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution in England all occurred during this period. These upheavals precipitated yet other major changes, including the growth of cities and of an urban working class, and the expansion of colonialism as the demand for cheap labor and raw materials increased. This enthusiasm for growth gave birth to the doctrine of manifest destiny, the ideological justification for continued territorial expansion. Thus, the Enlightenment ushered in a new way of thinking and affected historical developments worldwide. Voltaire. Francois-Marie Arouet, better known as Voltaire, was the most representative figure, almost the personification, of the Enlightenment spirit. Voltaire was instrumental in introducing the ideas of Newton and Locke to the French intelligentsia. He hated and attacked through his writings the arbitrary despotic rule of kings, the selfish privileges of the nobility and the church, religious intolerance, and, above all, the injustice of the French Ancien Régime, the old order. In his numerous books and pamphlets, where the authorities regularly condemned and burned, he protested against government persecution of the freedoms of thought and religion. Voltaire believed that people could never be happy until an enlightened society removed the traditional obstructions to the progress of the human mind. His personal and public involvement in the struggle against established political and religious authority gave authenticity to his ideas. Voltaire persuaded a whole generation that fundamental changes were necessary, paving the way for a revolution in France that he never intended, and probably would not have approved. For example, Voltaire did not believe that all men are created equal, the credo of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Thomas Jefferson, and the American Declaration of Independence. Industrial Revolution. The Enlightenment emphasis on scientific investigation and technological invention opened up new possibilities for human understanding of the world and for control of its material forces. Research into the phenomena of electricity and combustion, along with the discovery of oxygen and the power of steam, had enormous consequences. Steam power, as an adjunct to, or replacement for, human and animal labor, initiated a new era in world history. These and other technological advances, admiringly recorded in the paintings of Joseph Wright of Derby, exemplified the Enlightenment notion of progress and gave birth to the Industrial Revolution. Most scholars mark the dawn of that technological revolution in the 1740s, with the invention in England of steam engines for industrial production. By 1850, England could boast the world's first manufacturing economy. Within a century, the harnessed power of steam, coal, oil, iron, steel, and electricity, working in concert, transformed Europe. These scientific and technological advances also affected the arts, particularly through the invention of photography and the use of new materials for constructing buildings. Am I going to read this part right here? Art in Society? Is that something? Maybe? I guess. I don't want to read this part, but I'm going to read it anyway. Okay. Art in Society. Joseph Wright of Derby and the Industrial Revolution. The scientific advances of the Enlightenment era affected the lives of everyone, and most people responded enthusiastically to the wonders of the Industrial Revolution, such as the steam engine, which gave birth to the modern manufacturing economy and the prospect of a seemingly limitless supply of goods and services. The fascination that science held for ordinary people as well as for the learned was a favorite subject of the English painter Joseph Wright of Derby. Wright studied painting near Birmingham, the center of the Industrial Revolution, and specialized in dramatically lit scenes showcasing the modern scientific instruments and experiments. Characteristic example of Wright's work are an experiment on a bird in the air pump and a philosopher giving a lecture on an orrery? I don't know. In the latter painting, a scholar demonstrates a mechanical model of the solar system called an orrery, in which each planet, represented by a metal orb, revolves around the sun, a lamp, at the correct relative velocity. Light from the lamp pours forth from in front of the boy, silhouetted in the foreground to create shadows that heighten the drama of the scene. Curious children crowd close to the tiny orbs representing the planets within the curving bands indicating their orbits. An earnest listener makes notes, while the lone woman seated at the far left and the two gentlemen at the right pay rapt attention. Scientific knowledge mesmerizes everyone in Wright's painting. The artist visually reinforces the fascination with the orrery by composing his image in a circular fashion, echoing the device's orbital design. The postures and gazes of all of the participants and observers focused attention on the cosmic model. Wright scrupulously and accurately rendered every detail of the figures, the mechanisms of the orrery, and even the books and curtain in the shadowy background. Wright's choice of subjects and realism in depicting them appealed to the great industrialists of his day, including Josiah Wedgwood, who pioneered many techniques of mass-produced pottery, and Sir Richard Arkwright, whose spinning frame revolutionized the textile industry. Both men often purchased paintings by Wright, featuring scientific advances. To them, the Derby artist's elevation of the theories and inventions of the Industrial Revolution to the plane of history painting was exciting and appropriately in tune with the new era of Enlightenment. Coalbrookdale Bridge. The first use of iron in bridge design was in the cast iron bridge built over the Severn River, near Coalbrookdale in England, where Abraham Darby III, one of the bridge's 2 designers, ran his family's cast iron business. The Darby family had spearheaded the iron industry in England, and they vigorously supported the investigation of new uses for the material. The fabrication of cast iron rails and bridge elements inspired Darby to work with architect Thomas F. Pritchard in designing the Coalbrook Bridge. The cast iron armature supporting the roadbed springs from stone pier to stone pier until it leaps the final 100 feet across the Severn River Gorge. The style of the graceful center arc echoes the grand arches of Roman aqueducts. At the same time, the exposed structure of the bridge's cast iron parts prefigure the skeletal use of iron and steel in the 19th century, when exposed structural armatures became expressive factors in the design of buildings such as the Crystal Palace in England and the Eiffel Tower in France. Before I move on to the next part, I just wanted to let you know that in this class that I'm taking, sometimes she only assigns part of one chapter. I am interested if you guys would be interested in that, or if you just rather I don't do anything because I physically can't read every single chapter. It's bad for my throat. So if you would be interested in just portions of chapters, I will also be talking about this at the end in case anybody is skipping right now. Still, if that's interesting to you, if that would be of interest to you, please let me know. I would love to do that for you. Okay. Quote-unquote natural art. The second key figure of the French Enlightenment, who is also instrumental in preparing the way ideologically for the French Revolution, was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Voltaire believed that the salvation of humanity lay in the advancement of science and the rational improvement of society. By contrast, Rousseau argued that the arts and sciences, society, and civilization in general had corrupted natural men, people in their primitive state. He was convinced that humanity's only salvation lay in a return to something like the ignorance, innocence, and happiness of its original condition. According to Rousseau, human capacity for feeling, sensibility, and emotions came before reason. To exist is to feel. Our feelings is undoubtedly earlier than our intelligence, and we had feelings before we had ideas. Nature alone must be the guide. All our natural inclinations are right. Fundamental to Rousseau's thinking was the notion that man by nature is good. He is depraved and perverted by society. He rejected the idea of progress, insisting that our minds have been corrupted in proportion as the arts and sciences have been improved. Rousseau's elevation of feeling above reason as the most primitive, and hence the most natural, human expression led him to exalt the ideal of peasants' simple life, with its honest and unsullied emotions. Rousseau's views, popular and widely read, were largely responsible for the turning away from the Rococo sensibility in the arts and the formation of a taste for the natural, as opposed to the artificial and frivolous. Chardin. Reflecting Rousseau's values, Jean-Baptiste Simone Chardin painted quiet scenes of domestic life in the tradition of 17th century Dutch genre scenes. These subjects offered Chardin an opportunity to praise the simple goodness of ordinary people, especially women and young children, who in spirit, occupation, and environment lived far from corrupt society. In Grace, Chardin ushered the viewers into a modest room where a woman is setting a table before dinner. The mood of quiet attention is at one with the hushed lighting and mellow color, and with the closely studied still life accessories. whose worn surfaces tell their own humble domestic history. The viewer witnesses... Ooh, I just turned the page on accident. Okay. The viewer witnesses a moment of social instruction, when the woman and the older sister supervise the younger sister in the simple, pious ritual of giving thanks to God before a meal. The simplicity of the composition reinforces the subdued charm of the scene, with the three figures highlighted against the dark background. Chardin was the Enlightenment's poet of the commonplace and master of its nuances. A gentle sentiment prevails in all his pictures, an emotion not contrived and artificial, but born of the painter's honesty, insight, and sympathy. Chardin's paintings had wide appeal, even in unexpected places. Louis XV, the royal personification of the Rococo in his life and tastes, once owned grace. The painter was also a favorite of Diderot, the leading art critic of the day, as well as the editor of the Encyclopedia. Oh, do I really want to do that? That sounds awful. Written sources: Diderot on Chardin and Boucher. Denis Diderot was a pioneer in the field of art criticism, as well as in the encyclopedic compilation of human knowledge. Between 1759 and 1781, he contributed views of the biennial Salon of the French Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture to the Parisian journal Correspondance Littéraire. It means it's correspondence literary, okay, of literature. In his review of the 1766 Salon, Diderot had the following praise for Chardin's still lifes and for naturalism in painting. There are many small pictures by Chardin at the Salon, almost all of them depicting fruit, with the accoutrements for a meal. This is nature itself. The objects stand up from the canvas, and they are so real that my eyes are fooled by them. In order to look at others' paintings, I feel as though I need different eyes, but to look at Chardin's, I only need keep the ones nature gave me and use them properly. If I had painting in mind as a career for my child, I'd buy this one, and have him copy it. Yet nature itself may be no more difficult to copy. Oh, Chardin, it's not white, red, or black pigment that you grind on your palette, but rather the very substance of objects. It's real air and light that you take onto the tip of your brush and transfer onto the canvas. It's magic. One can't understand how it's done. Thick layers of color, applied one on top of the other, each one filtering through from underneath to create the effect. Close up, everything blurs, goes flat and disappears. From a distance, everything comes back to life and reappears. While Diderot lavish praise on some of the leading artists of his day, he wrote scathing reviews of others. He admired Chardin because his work was the antithesis of the Rococo manner in painting, which Diderot deplored. Here, for example, is what Diderot had to say about Francois Boucher, who also exhibited in the Salon of 1763, and his younger protégés emulating his Rococo style. What a misuse of talent! How much time gone to waste! You could have had twice the effect for half the effort. When one writes, does one have to write everything? And one paints, does one have to paint everything? This man is the ruination of all young apprentice painters. Barely able to handle a brush and hold a palette, they torture themselves stringing together infantile garlands, painting chubby crimson bottoms, and hurl themselves headlong into all kinds of follies, which cannot be redeemed by originality, fire, tenderness, nor by any magic in their models. For they lack all of these. Damn. Okay. Jean-Baptiste Rose. The sentimental narrative in art became the specialty of French painter Jean-Baptiste Rose, whose most popular work, Village Bride, sums up the characteristics of the genre. The setting is an unadorned room in a rustic dwelling. In a notary's presence, the elderly father has passed his daughter's dowry to her youthful husband-to-be and blesses the pair, who gently take each other's arms. The old mother tearfully gives her daughter's arm a farewell caress, while the youngest sister melts in tears on the shoulder of the demure bride. An envious older sister broods behind her father's chair. Rosy-faced, healthy children play around the scene. The picture's story is simple, the happy climax of a rural romance. The picture's moral is just as clear. Happiness is the reward of natural virtue. Greuze produced this work at a time when the audience for art was expanding. The strict social hierarchy that provided the foundation for Rococo art and patronage gave way to a bourgeoisie, economic and social system. The newly important middle class embraced art, and paintings such as The Village Bride particularly appealed to the ordinary, hard-working people. They carefully analyzed each gesture and nuance of sentiment and reacted with tumultuous enthusiasm. I'm telling you, that truck is still here. Same one as earlier. Okay, where was I? Okay. At the 1761 Salon of the Royal Academy, Greuze's picture received enormous attention. Diderot, who reviewed the exhibition for Correspondance Littéraire, reported that it was difficult to get near the canvas because of the throngs of admirers. Elizabeth Louise Vigée Lebrun. Another manifestation of the naturalistic impulse in the 18th century French art was the emergence of a new, more personal and less pretentious mode of portraiture. Self-portrait by Elizabeth Louise Vigée Lebrun is a characteristic example of the genre. The painter looks directly at viewers and pauses in her work to return their gaze. Although her mood is lighthearted and her costume's details echo the serpentine figure that Rococo artists and wealthy patrons loved, nothing about the Vigée Lebrun's pose appears contrived. Hers is the self-confident, natural stance of a woman whose art has won her an independent role in society. She portrayed herself in a close-up, intimate view at work on one of the many portraits she painted of her most important patron, Queen Marie Antoinette. Alright, Art and Society, Vigée Lebrun, L'Abbé Giard, and the French Royal Academy. Let me just take a moment and see where I am. I just want to know how much more of this I have to read. 95? Okay. We're at 84, it goes to 95, so we're halfway through. Okay. The two most successful women artists in 18th century France were Elizabeth Louise Vigée Lebrun and Adelaide Libby Giard. Although they shared the honor of admission to the French Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture and enjoyed royal patronage, their careers differed in some significant ways. Vigée Lebrun began painting as a young girl under the tutelage of her father, Louis Vigée, a successful portrait painter. By the time she was 15, she had already received portrait commissions of her own. After her marriage to Jean-Baptiste Lebrun, a prominent Parisian art dealer, she began to attract wealthy and important clients, whom the couple entertained in salons at their fashionable home. Vigée Lebrun soon became the favorite painter of Queen Marie Antoinette, whose influence gained the 28-year-old artist admission to the Royal Academy in 1783. She eventually painted some 30 portraits of the Queen, including figure 2615A. It's just titled Marie Antoinette of 1787. Vigée Lebrun was famous for the force and grace of her portraits of high-born ladies and royalty throughout Europe. Her induction into the Royal Academy was short-lived, however. After the French Revolution, the Academy rescinded her membership because women were no longer welcome. Nevertheless, Vigée Lebrun enjoyed continued success owing to her talent, wit, and ability to forge connections with those in power in the post-revolutionary period. 6 years older than Vigée Lebrun, Libby Giard never achieved the renown enjoyed by her younger contemporary. She trained with Francois-Élie Vincent, and later with his son, Francois-André Vincent, whom she married after her divorce from her first husband, Louis Nicolas Giard, a clerk. Like Vigée Lebrun, Libby Giard boasted royal patronage, but not of the same order. She became the official painter of the Mesdames, the aunts of King Louis XIV. Or 16th. I think it's the 16th. Probably. In 1787, 4 years after she was admitted to the French Painting Academy on the same day as Vigée Lebrun, the two painters captured the remaining 2 of 4 memberships reserved for women, a quota that Libby Giard worked hard to lift after gaining admission. The 2 artists took opposite sides during... Wait, what? What? It just ends there? What the fuck? Is that it, maybe? Okay, there's a little tiny paragraph, and I don't know if it belongs to this part or a different part. I'm going to read it with both, and whatever one makes sense, okay? The 2 artists took opposite sides during the French Revolution, and Libby Giard painted portraits of some of the uprising's leaders, including one of the few known portraits of Maximilien Robespierre, the most prominent figure calling for the death of the king. You know what? That was definitely the correct one. Okay. Yeah, there's even like a thing. There's even a separation thing. I don't even usually read that part. What's wrong with me? Okay. Sorry, I just turned off the thing I've been reading from. Love that. Okay. Adelaide Libby Giard. After Vigée Lebrun, the second most important woman painter in Paris at the end of the 18th century, was Adelaide Libby Giard. A comparison between Libby Giard's self-portrait with 2 pupils and Vigée Lebrun's self-portrait is revealing. It underscores the 2 women's different self-images. The young painter presented herself at work on a portrait of her most important patron, Marie Antoinette. The subject of the canvas that Libby Giard is painting is unknown. Her self-portrait focuses instead on her role as a teacher. She had many as 9 women in her studio at one time. Here, 2 apprentices, dressed more simply than their elegantly clad instructor, cluster behind her, one intently studying the painting in progress, the other, like Libby Giard, gazing at the viewer. The 3 figures form a classical pyramidal composition, echoed by the easel. In the V formed by the 2 triangles is a portrait bust of the artist's father. Appropriately for this early feminist, her muse is a man, a reversal of the traditional gender roles. William Hogarth. Across the channel, a truly English style of painting emerged with William Hogarth, who satirized the lifestyle of the newly prosperous middle class with comic zest. Traditionally, the British imported painters from the continent, Holbein, Rubens, and Van Dyck among them. Throughout his career, Hogarth waged a lively campaign against the English feeling of dependence on, and inferiority to, these artists. Although Hogarth would have been the last to admit it, his own painting owed much to the work of his contemporaries in France, the Rococo artists. Okay. Yet his subject matter, frequently moral in tone, was distinctively English. This was the great age of English satirical writing, and Hogarth, who admired that literary genre and included Henry Fielding, the author of Tom Jones, among his closest friends, clearly saw himself as translating satire into the visual arts. Hogarth's favorite device was to make a series of narrative paintings and prints in a sequence similar to chapters in a book or scenes in a play, following a character or group of characters in their encounters with some social evil. Breakfast Scene, from Marriage à la Mode, is one in a sequence of 6 paintings satirizing the marital immoralities of the moneyed classes in England. In it, the marriage of a young viscount is just beginning to founder. The husband and wife are tired after a long night spent in separate pursuits. While the wife stayed at home for an evening of cards and music making, her young husband has been away from the house, enjoying the company of another woman. He thrusts his hands deep into the empty money pockets of his breeches, while his wife's small dog sniffs inquiringly at the other woman's lacy cap protruding from his coat pocket. A steward, his hands full of unpaid bills, rolls his eyes in despair at the actions of his noble master and mistress. The couple's home is luxurious, but Hogarth filled it with witty clues to the dubious taste of its occupants. For example, the row of pious religious paintings on the upper wall of a distant room concludes with a curtained canvas undoubtedly depicting an erotic subject. According to the custom of the day, ladies could not view this discreetly hidden painting, but at the pull of a cord, the master and his male guests could enjoy a tableau of convorting figures. In Breakfast Scene, as in all his work, Hogarth proceeded as a novelist might, elaborating on his subject with carefully chosen detail, the discovery of which heightens the comedy. Hogarth designed the marriage series to be published as a set of engravings. The prints of this and his other moral narratives were so popular that unscrupulous entrepreneurs produced unauthorized versions almost as fast as the artist created his originals. The popularity of these prints speaks not only to the appeal of their subjects, but also to the democratization of knowledge and culture fostered by the Enlightenment, and to the exploitation of new printing technologies that opened the way for a more affordable and widely disseminated visual culture. Thomas Gainsborough. A contrasting blend of naturalistic representation and Rococo setting is found in Mrs. Richard Brinsley Sheridan, a characteristic portrait by British painter Thomas Gainsborough. Gainsborough presented Mrs. Sheridan as a lovely, informally dressed woman, seated in a rustic landscape faintly reminiscent of a Watteau, in its soft-hued light and feathery brushwork. Gainsborough's goal was to match the natural, unspoiled beauty of the landscape with that of his sitter. Mrs. Sheridan projects an air of ingenuous sweetness. Her dark brown hair blows freely in the slight wind. Gainsborough planned to keep the picture as a more pastoral air by adding several sheep, but he did not live long enough to complete the canvas. Even without the sheep, the painting clearly expresses Gainsborough's deep interest in the landscape setting. Although he won greater fame in his time for his portraits, as did his slightly older contemporary, Sir Joshua Reynolds, see Great Manner Portraiture above, that section of which I'm not reading, because I just realized I don't have to. It's just like one of those block things. I'm pretty sure I accidentally read one or two of them on accident this time. Sorry, or not. I don't know what you want. Okay. Gainsborough had become as a landscape painter and always preferred painting scenes of nature to depicting individual likenesses. Benjamin West. Some American artists also became well known in England. Benjamin West, born in Pennsylvania on what was then the colonial frontier, traveled on the continent early in life to study art and then went to England, where he met with almost immediate success. One of the 36 founding members of the Royal Academy of Arts, West succeeded Reynolds as its president. He became official painter to George III and retained that position even during the strained period of the American Revolution. In Death of General Wolfe, West depicted the mortally wounded young English commander just after his defeat of the French in the decisive Battle of Quebec in 1759, which gave Canada to Great Britain. Because his subject was a recent event, West clothed his characters in contemporary costumes and included a rare glimpse for his English audience of a Native American warrior, depicted as an exemplary, noble savage. However, West blended this realism of detail with the grand tradition of history painting by arranging his figures in a complex and theatrically ordered composition. His modern hero dies among grieving officers on the field of victorious battle in a way that suggests the death of a saint. The composition, in fact, derives from paintings of the lamentation over the dead Christ. West wanted to present this hero's death in the service of the state as a martyrdom charged with religious emotions. His innovative and highly effective combination of the conventions of traditional heroic painting with a look of modern realism influenced history painting well into the 19th century. Alright. John Singleton Copley. American artist John Singleton Copley matured as a painter in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Like West, Copley later settled in England, where he absorbed the fashionable English portrait style. But unlike grand manner portraits, Copley's Paul Revere, painted before the artist left Boston, conveys a sense of directness and faithfulness to visual fact that marked the taste for honesty and plainness noted by many late 18th and early 19th century visitors to America. When Copley painted his likeness, Revere was not yet the familiar hero of the American Revolution. In this picture, he is a working professional silversmith. The setting is plain, the lighting clear and revealing. Revere sits in his shirt sleeves, holding a teapot in progress. He pauses and turns his head to look the observer straight in the eyes. The painter treated the reflections in the polished wood of the tabletop with as much care as he did Revere's figure, his tools, and the teapot resting on its leather graver's pillow. This informality and the sense of the moment link this painting to the contemporaneous English and continental portraits. But the spare style and the emphasis on the sitter's down-to-earth character differentiate this American work from its European counterparts. I'm gonna get some food. I'll be right back. Alright, that was a good stuff. Alright. The Grand Tour. The 18th century public also sought naturalness in artists' depictions of landscapes. Documentation of specific places became popular, in part due to growing travel opportunities and expanding colonialism. These depictions of geographic settings also served the needs of many scientific expeditions mounted during the century and satisfied the desires of genteel tourists for mementos of their journeys. By this time, a grand tour of the major sites of Europe was an essential part of every well-bred person's education. Those who embarked on a tour of the continent wished to return with souvenirs to help them remember their experiences and impress those at home with the wonders they had seen. The English were especially eager collectors of travel pictures. Okay. Venetian artists in particular found it profitable to produce paintings in the most characteristic vedute, or scenic views, of their city to sell to British visitors. Chief among those artists was Antonio Canaletto, whose works, for example, Riva degli Schiavoni in Venice, English tourists avidly acquired as evidence of their visit to Italy's magical city of water. Pompeo Battoni. Some of those embarked on the Grand Tour sought to obtain a more personalized memento of their cultural journey than a portrait of Venice, a portrait of themselves by the leading Italian portrait painter of the day, Pompeo Battoni. Born in Lucca and trained in Rome, where he eventually became curator of the papal art collection, Battoni received commissions for Grand Tour portraits from prosperous visitors of various nationalities, but especially from Englishmen. More than 150 of Battoni's portraits of English gentlemen with Italian backdrops are in museums and private collections today. Battoni's portrait of Charles John Crowley is a characteristic example of the type of portrait his patrons found so appealing. Crowley, a second-generation member of the British Parliament from Yorkshire, stands in a palatial columnar study with a view of the Roman countryside behind him. Attended by his faithful dog, Crowley, by the way, it's spelled like Crowley, but without the Y. So, Crowley is surrounded by abundant evidence of his learning and passion for antiquity. Most prominent are copies of reduced size of the Farnese Hercules in Naples, and of a statue of the sleeping Ariadne in the Vatican. Statuettes such as these were among the prized souvenirs that grand tourists brought back home together with models of antique monuments such as the Colosseum and the Column of Trajan. On the elegant table on which Crowley leans is an astronomical model and an unrolled plan of St. Peter's. In 1764, after returning from Rome, Crowley was elected a member of the Society of Dilettanti, a prestigious group of British connoisseur admirers of Greco-Roman art. Neoclassicism. Oh my god, are we finally close to the end? We are. Guys, this is the last major section. I'm excited. Okay. Neoclassicism. As Battoni's Charles John Crowley vividly illustrates, the popularity of the Grand Tour among the cultural elite of Europe both reflected and contributed to the heightened interest in classical antiquity during the Enlightenment. Exposure to the art treasures of Italy was also a major factor in the rise of Neoclassicism as the leading art movement of the late 18th century. Further whetting the public appetite for classicism were the excavations of Herculaneum and Pompeii, which the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius had buried. Gibbon and Winckelmann. The enthusiasm for classical antiquity also permeated much of the scholarship of the time. In the late 18th century, ancient world increasingly became the focus of academic research. For example, a visit to Rome inspired Edward Gibbon to begin his monumental Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which appeared between 1776 and 1788. The classical world, and specifically classical art, became the lifelong focus of Joachim Winckelmann, whose scholars widely recognized as the first modern art historian. Painting. The Enlightenment ideal of a participatory and knowledgeable citizenry lay behind the revolt against the French monarchy in 1789. But the immediate causes of the French Revolution were France's economic crisis and the clash between the Third Estate, bourgeoisie, peasantry, and urban and rural workers, and the First and Second Estates, the clergy and nobility, respectively. They fought over the issue of representation in the legislative body. The Estates General, which had been convened to discuss taxation as a possible solution to the economic problem. However, the ensuing revolution revealed the instability of the monarchy and of French society's traditional structure and resulted in a succession of republics and empires as France struggled to find a way to adjust to these new fundamental changes. Jacques-Louis David. The artist who became the painter-ideologist of the French Revolution was Jacques-Louis David. Mengs and Kaufman were pioneers of neoclassical painting, but David is generally considered the greatest neoclassical master. A distant relative of Francois Boucher, David followed the Rococo painter's style until a period of study in Rome won the younger man over to the classical art tradition. David favored academic teachings about using the art of the ancients and of the great Renaissance masters as models. He, like Winckelmann, rebelled against Rococo style as an artificial taste and exalted the perfect form of Greek art. Oath of the Herati. David embraced the Enlightenment belief that the subject of an artwork should have a moral. Paintings representing noble deeds in the past could inspire virtue in the present. A milestone painting in the neoclassical master's career, Oath of the Herati, depicts a story from pre-Republican Rome, the heroic phase of Roman history. The topic was not too obscure for David's audience. Pierre Corneille? Sure. Had retold the story of conflict between love and patriotism, recounted by the ancient... What? Oh, wait, what? I'm sorry. Just give me a moment here. I'm really lost. Oh, okay. I'm putting this on invert and it's hard to tell where the squares are. I got it now. Okay. Recounted by the ancient Roman historian Libby in a play performed in Paris several years earlier. According to the story, the leaders of the warring cities of Rome and Elba decided to resolve their conflicts in a series of encounters waged by 3 representatives from each side. The Romans chose as their champions the 3 Horatius brothers, who had to face the 3 sons of the Caratius family from Elba. A sister of the Herati, Camilla, was the bride-to-be of one of the Caratius sons, and the wife of the youngest Horatius was the sister of the Herati. David's painting shows the Herati as they swear on their swords, held high by their father, to win or die for Rome, oblivious to the anguish and sorrow of the Horatius women. Oath of the Herati exemplifies the neoclassical style. Not only was the subject a narrative of patriotism and sacrifice excerpted from Roman history, but the painter depicted the story according to the principles of classical art. The action unfolds in a shallow space, much like a stage setting, defined by a severely simple architectural framework. David deployed his statuesque and carefully molded figures across the space close to the foreground, in a manner recalling Greco-Roman relief sculpture. The rigid, angular, and virile forms of the men on the left effectively contrast with the soft, curvilinear shapes of the distraught women on the right. This juxtaposition visually pits the virtues that Enlightenment leaders ascribed to men, such as courage, patriotism, and unwavering loyalty to a cause, against the emotions of love, sorrow, and despair expressed by the women in the painting. The French viewing audience perceived such emotionalism as characteristic of the female nature. The message was clear and of a type readily identifiable to the pre-revolutionary French public. The picture created a sensation at its first exhibition in Paris in 1785. Although David had painted it under royal patronage and did not intend the painting as a revolutionary statement, Oath of the Herati aroused his audience to a patriotic zeal. Neoclassicism soon became the semi-official artistic style of the French Revolution. Death of Murat. When the revolution broke out in 1789, David threw in his lot with the Jacobins, the radical and militant revolutionary faction. He accepted the role of de facto minister of propaganda, organizing political pageants and ceremonies requiring rolling scenery, costumes, and sculptural props. David believed that art could play an important role in educating the public, and that dramatic paintings emphasized patriotism and civic virtue would prove effective as rallying calls. However, rather than continuing to create artworks focused on scenes from antiquity, David began to portray events from the French Revolution itself. In 1793, David painted Death of Murat, which he wanted not only to serve as a record of the important episode in the struggle to overthrow the monarchy, but also to provide inspiration and encouragement to the revolutionary forces. The painting commemorates the assassination that year of Jean-Paul Murat, an influential writer who was David's friend. The artist depicted the martyred revolutionary still holding a quill pen in his right hand after Charlotte Corday, a member of a rival political faction, stabbed him to death, while Murat was immersed in a bathtub as he worked. Murat suffered from a painful skin disease and required frequent medicinal baths. His desk was a board placed across the tub with a wood stand next to it for his writing materials. David presented the scene with directness and clarity. The cold, neutral space above Murat's figure slumped in the tub produces a chilling oppressiveness. The painter vividly placed all narrative details in the foreground. The knife, the wound, the blood, the letter with which Corday gained entrance, to sharpen the sense of pain and outrage. David masterfully composed the painting to present Murat as a tragic martyr who died in the service of the revolution. Indeed, the writing stand, which bears the words, "To Murat, David," resembles a tombstone, and David based Murat's figure on the dead Christ in Michelangelo's Pieta in St. Peter's in Rome. The reference to Christ's martyrdom made the painting a kind of altarpiece for the new civic religion, inspiring the French people with a saintly dedication of their slain leader. Architecture and sculpture. Architects in the Enlightenment era also formed a deep admiration for the Greco-Roman past. Fairly early in the 18th century, they began to turn away from the theatricality and ostentation of Baroque design, still evident in grandiose structures such as the Belheim Palace in England and Karlskirche in Austria, as well as from the delicate flourishes of Rococo salons, figures with blah, palaces, figure blah, and churches, figures with blah. The style they instead embraced offered a more streamlined antique look. Pantheon. The Parisian church of Sainte Genevieve, now the Pantheon, designed by Jacques Germain Soufflot, stands as testament to the revived interest in classical architecture. The Roman ruins at Baalbek in Syria, especially the gigantic colonnade made of the gigantic colonnade of the Temple of Jupiter, provided much of the inspiration for Soufflot's neoclassical church. The columns, reproduced with studied archaeological precision, stand out from walls that are severely blank, except for a repeated garland motif near the top. The colonnaded dome, a neoclassical version of the domes of St. Peter in Rome, the Église du Dôme in Paris, and the St. Paul's in London, rises above a Greek cross plan. Both the dome and the vaults rest on an interior grid of towering Corinthian columns, as if the portico's colonnade continued within. Although the whole effect, inside and out, is Roman, the structural principles employed were essentially Gothic. Soufflot was one of the first 18th century builders to apply the logical engineering of Gothic cathedrals to modern buildings. With few exceptions, however, such as Strawberry Hill, owned and largely designed by Horace Walpole. The revival of interest in the Gothic architectural style did not take hold until the following century. St. Martin in the Fields. The appeal of classical architecture extended well beyond French borders. The popularity of the Greek and Roman cultures was due not only to their association with morality, rationality, and integrity, but also to their connection to political systems ranging from Athenian democracy to Roman imperial rule. Thus, parliamentary England joined revolutionary France in embracing Neoclassicism. In England, Neoclassicism appeal was also due to its clarity and simplicity. These characteristics provided a stark contrast to the complexity and opulence of Baroque art, then associated with flamboyant rule of absolute monarchy. In English architecture, the preference for a simple and rational style derived indirectly from the authority of the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius. Through Andrea Palladio, and in the 16th century, and Inigo Jones in the 17th. Okay. In 1722, decades before Soufflot began work on the Pantheon in Paris, James Gibbs, a Scottish architect, designed the Church of St. Martin in the Fields in London. The church, which replaced earlier churches on the same site dating back to the early 13th century, is dedicated to Saint Martin of Tours. It takes its name from its rural location at the time, although today it stands at the northeastern corner of the Trafalgar Square, one of the most important and most congested public spaces in the modern city. Gibbs' design is an eclectic combination of a Palladian version of an ancient Roman temple and an Italian Baroque bell tower. Gibbs, like Fischer von Erlach in Austria, worked with the architect Carlo Fontana in Rome and was highly influenced by the work of Sir Christopher Wren. St. Martin in the Fields has a classically inspired porch of Corinthian columns, 6 across the front and 2 at the sides, capped by a pediment. The body of the church is rectangular, with 2 stories of arcuated windows corresponding to the 5 bays and 2 stories of the interior nave. Although the combination of disparate elements, especially the placement of a tall church steeple on top of a Roman temple, was widely criticized at the time, Gibbs' design influenced many later churches in England and America. Is this really still... Am I actually still in... I guess so. There should only be a few more pages left. Chiswick House. Begun only 3 years after the start of construction of St. Martin in the Fields, is another major monument of English neoclassical architecture. Chiswick House, on the outskirts of London, designed by Richard Boyle, Earl of Burlington, with the help of William Kent, an important impetus for the eager embrace of the neoclassical style by British architects during the 18th century, was the publication of 1715 of Colin Campbell's Vitruvius Britannicus, 3 volumes of engraved ancient buildings, prefaced by a denunciation of the Italian Baroque style and high praise for the Palladio and Jones. Chiswick House is a free variation on the theme of Palladio's Villa Rotonda. The exterior design provided a clear alternative to the colorful splendor of Versailles. In its simple symmetry, unadorned planes, right angles, and precise proportions, Chiswick House looks very classical and rational. But the Palladian-style villa's setting within informal gardens, where a charming irregularity of layout and freely growing uncropped foliage dominate the scene, balances the classical severity and rationality of the architecture. Just as the owners of English villas cultivated irregularity in the landscaping surrounding their homes, They sometimes preferred interiors ornamented in a style more closely related to Rococo decoration. At Chiswick House, the interior design creates a luxurious Baroque foil to the stern symmetry of the exterior and the plan. Palladian classicism prevailed in English architecture until about 1760, when it began to evolve into a more archaeologically faithful Neoclassicism, playing a pivotal role in the shift from a dependence on Renaissance examples to the emulation of ancient models. Was the publication of 1762 of the first volume of Antiquities of Athens by two British painters and architects, James Stewart and Nicholas Rivet. Indeed, the purest expression of Greek-inspired architecture in 18th century England was Stewart's design for the Temple of Theseus at Hagley Park. The setting of the Hagley portico was anything but neoclassical, however. Stour Head Park. Another early masterpiece of the picturesque garden genre of 18th century English architecture is the park at Stour Head, designed by Henry Flitcroft in collaboration with the property's owner, Henry Hoare, the son of a wealthy banker. Hoare's country estate in Wiltshire overlooked a lush valley in which Flitcroft created an irregularly shaped artificial lake by damming up the Stour River. Around it, he placed a winding path leading to and from a grotto adorned with statues of a river god and a nymph. The twisting road in the grotto conjured, for Hoare, the voyage of Aeneas, and the entrance to the underworld in Virgil's Aeneid. Required reading in the original Latin for any properly educated British gentleman. Flitcroft also placed around Hoare's version of Lake Avernus a bridge with 5 arches modeled on Andrea Palladio's bridge at Vicenza, and pavilions that are free variations on famous classical buildings, including the Pantheon in Rome and the Temple of Venus at Baalbek, which at Stour Head became a Temple of Apollo. Flitcroft sited all of the structures strategically to create vistas resembling those in the paintings of Claude Lorraine, beloved by those who had completed a grand tour. In fact, the view reproduced here of Flitcroft's Pantheon beyond the Palladian Bridge on the far side of the lake at Stour Head specifically emulates Claude's 1672 landscape with Aeneas at Delos in the National Gallery in London, not illustrated, in turn inspired by the Aeneid. Still, consistent with the eclectic tastes of the 18th century patrons, Hoare's Park also contains Chinese bridges, a Turkish tent, and a Gothic tower. Thomas Jefferson. Because the appeal of Neoclassicism was due in part to the values with which it was associated, morality, idealism, patriotism, and civic virtue, it is not surprising that in the new American Republic, Thomas Jefferson spearheaded a movement to adopt Neoclassicism as the national architectural style. Jefferson, economist, educational theorist, and gifted amateur architect, as well as statesman, admired Palladio immensely and read carefully the Italian architect's 4 books of architecture. Later, while minister to France, he studied 18th century French classical architecture and city planning and visited the Maison Carrée, an ancient Roman temple at Nimes. After his European sojourn, Jefferson decided to completely remodel Monticello, his home near Charlottesville, Virginia, which he originally had designed in a different style. The final version of Monticello reveals the influence of Palladio's Villa Rotonda and of Chiswick House, but the materials Jefferson used are traditional Virginia wood and brick. The single-storied structure has an octagonal dome set above the central drawing room behind a pediment-capped columnar porch. It sits on a wooded plot of land with mountain vistas all around. Monticello means hillock or little mountain in Italian. The setting fulfilled another of Jefferson's goals, to build for himself a country villa inspired by the ones described by the first-century Roman author Pliny, who died during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79. Jean-Antoine Houdon. Neoclassicism also became the preferred style for public sculpture in the new American Republic. When members of the Virginia legislature wanted to erect a life-size marble statue of Virginia-born George Washington, they awarded the commission to the leading French neoclassical sculptor of the late 18th century, Jean-Antoine Houdon. Houdon had already carved a bust portrait of Benjamin Franklin when Franklin was America's ambassador to France. Houdon's portrait of Washington is the sculptural equivalent of a painted grand manner portrait. But although Washington wears 18th century garb, the statue makes overt reference to the Roman Republic. The column on which Washington leans is a bundle of rods with an axe attached. The ancient Roman fasces, an emblem of authority, used much later as the emblem of Mussolini's fascist government in the 20th century for Italy. Words. The 13 rods symbolize the 13 original states. The plow behind Washington alludes to Cincinnatus, a patrician of the early Roman Republic who was elected dictator during a time of war and resigned his position as soon as victory had been achieved in order to return to his farm. Washington wears the badge of the Society of the Cincinnati, visible beneath the bottom of his waistcoat, an association found in 1783 for officers in the Revolutionary Army who had resumed their peacetime roles. Tellingly, Washington no longer holds his sword in Houdon's statue. Okay. Horatio Greenough? Sure. After his death, Washington gradually took on almost godlike stature as the father of his country. In 1840, the U.S. Congress commissioned American sculptor Horatio Greenough to create a statue of the country's first president for the Capitol. Greenough used Houdon's portrait as his model for the head, but he portrayed Washington as semi-nude and enthroned, as Phidias depicted Zeus in the famous lost statue he made for the god's temple at Olympia in ancient Greece. The colossal statue, Washington is more than 11 feet tall, seated, is a supreme example of the neoclassical style, but it did not win favor with either the public or the Congress that commissioned it. Although no one ever threw Greenough's statue into the Potomac River, as one congressman suggested, the legislators never placed it in its intended position beneath the Capitol dome. In fact, by 1840, the neoclassical style itself was no longer in vogue. The leading artists of Europe and America had already embraced the new Romantic style examined in the next chapter. And that's the big picture. And on to the next thing. I have class in 35 minutes. I'm supposed to read the Romanticism part in the next chapter. I'm actually going to record that so you guys get a sense of what it might be like if I just recorded one section from a chapter, and you can see if you want that or not, because I would really like that, because sometimes I only have a section to do, and if that would help you guys, I would love to do that. Again, you can, if do you want those sections, please tell me. I would love to know. Yeah. Also, if you want to vote on any chapters from like Gardner's Volume 1 or Gardner's Volume 2, that would be really, really helpful. If somebody comments in, down below a certain chapter that they think would be really, really helpful, and, maybe please, like, at least 5 other people like the comment or something. That would probably be reason enough for me to record it for you. Again, doing these full chapters is not good on my throat. So, yeah, sorry, I guess. Yeah, but I will try to find the time to do that if it would be that helpful for you guys. I have a break coming up in March. I think it's only like maybe a week long. But if there's like a chapter or two that you guys really, really want me to do, that would be really helpful. I would love to try to help and do that, especially over that break. Or, if I find time anytime soon. Thanks for sticking with me. I might be posting like a cooking series soon. I know that's really weird, but I live alone, and I have to find dishes that only serve 1 to 2 people because that's all I can eat. And I'll be posting like the first maybe 1, maybe 2 episodes or installations of it soon. If you guys like that, that's really cool. Please let me know. And yeah, I really hope your classes are going well. I hope that you get good grades this quarter, this semester, whatever system your school is on. I hope you have really good luck on your tests, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you later. Hey, so I just looked at how long that little part of that chapter that I'm supposed to read for today is. Reminder that we just went over 20 pages. This is 14 pages. I don't think that's fair for one section to be basically almost the entire chapter, and I'm not going to be able to read it before class, so I'm not going to even start. Thank you. And it just looks like it's mostly just a bunch of paintings. You just going through a bunch of paintings. So yeah, maybe I'll do that section a different time, or whatever the next section she asks us to read. Maybe I'll do that then, and maybe I'll get a taste for it then. Yep. See ya. I hope you have a good day.